Okay, perfect. Okay, so I think we are good to go. I'll introduce myself. My name is Jessica Kirschbaumer. I'm President and Communications Chair of the Alberta Horse Trials Association. And we are very excited to be putting on our third webinar of the spring. We've been doing these for a couple of years free of charge, and they've had a really good turnout. So we're very excited to keep giving out this opportunity for people to come and see what we're offering and different things to learn about. I'd also like to thank Kathleen Ziegler, our high performance chair, who is the one who organizes these and takes care of our high performance program and athlete development. And then we'd also like to welcome Dr. Sarah Pedersen. She has also done several talks for us over the last few years, and they've all been really interesting and super educational. And so, Sarah, I will let you introduce yourself, and then you can go ahead and get started.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for having me. So this topic came up. We wanted to talk about it because it is such a broad and a hot button topic and difficult to find good evidence on. And so in my practice, I'm a veterinarian, but I also am an equine chiropractor and an equine acupuncturist, and I have rehab.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
That's okay. I unmuted myself. And so I do see a lot of horse backs in my practice, and I wanted to kind of come in and talk tonight, and just so that people have a basic understanding of at least what to look for. My goal is not to turn everybody into saddle fitters. And I should put my first slide on as well. Oh, now it's mad. Oh, there we go. I'm not a saddle fitter. I'm not claiming to be a saddle fitter, but I do see a lot of horsebacks. And actually this week, I've had 2 lamenesses that were directly linked to saddles. The next few slides are I just pulled these off the website. This is for anybody. You can go and pull them off any websites, but it's what it takes to become a rep. Now, the first really clear distinction I want to make, and I'm not trying to come for anybody or, be controversial at all, but there is a big difference between a saddle rep and a saddle fitter. And I think as equine, as riders, as horse owners, as clients, it's a really important distinction to make. Especially my background is I come from the UK, and in the UK, every small town has a saddle fitter or a saddle maker. And so we do have saddle fitters and master saddlers in Alberta, and I know they do travel to BC as well. But I just thought this was a really interesting place to start. So here, this is for an advert for sales representative. And again, note that it's a sales representative, not a saddle fitter. They must have equestrian experience. Sales experience is appreciated, and good communication skills. Here's another one. Job requirements: valid driver's license and experience with horses is a plus. This is another advert. Requirements, what we're looking for: you have a good driving record, good interpersonal skills, passionate rider that understands. There's another one: you enjoy a travel bug, and your knowledge of horse shows is a plus. So my point to all of this is that nowhere on any of these adverts, and these for several different companies, does it talk about anatomy of the horse or anatomy of the saddle. And so I think that's just something to be aware of, that, if you have a saddle fitter or a master saddler that has several different brands and they can advise you, that's one thing. But I feel like a lot of people, especially in my practice, will say to me, oh, well, we've had the saddle fitter out. The saddle is fine. They've had the rep out, not the saddle fitter. And so I just want to make that really clear distinction. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm not coming for anybody. The reps are great, but I just think it's really important that we make that distinction so that we know what we're talking about. Very briefly, this is kind of the basic anatomy of the saddle, but this is so that we can chat about and understand each other when we talk about it. So the big thing to remember here is this is kind of the basic saddle that we're all familiar with. And then the saddle tree is kind of the skeleton of the saddle. And when we talk about the points, this is what we're talking about. And this is obviously built into the seat of the saddle. The first thing that I want to touch on is saddle position. And so often our saddle is placed too far forward. It's really important that we check this when the horse is on level ground, because of course, if your horse isn't standing squarely, its shoulders are going to be different. And so if you look, I really like this graphic. If you look at the red hand here, you can see that they are checking where the cartilage cap of the shoulder blade is. So you can see the shoulder blade and you can feel the spine of the shoulder blade. If you just run your hand over your horse's shoulder, you can feel the spine really well. And then there is a cartilage cap on the top of that scapula, and often that runs into the saddle. So you can kind of see here with this saddle that's put quite far forward, that cartilage cap is going to run directly into the point of that saddle. And so it's really important that we do set our saddle back in the correct position. And if you look down as well, we want this, here, right here as well, the green hand is showing us that we want this set quite far back with the girth as well. And in general, we all tend to put our saddles quite far forward. I was talking to a client recently, probably a couple of weeks ago now, and I guess that she was saying that there's a bit of a trend now with some of the kind of the lay chiropractors that they're telling people to put their saddles further forward. And so I haven't personally run into this. This was reported from a client of mine, but I just, from an anatomy standpoint, really they should be further back. And as a general trend, we tend as riders to put them further forward than they need to be. So that's kind of the first thing that I wanted to address. The second thing is the level seat. So it's kind of, if you take a look here at the seat, you should be able to essentially roll a pen or a pencil down the seat and it should come to rest right in the bottom part. So it's not tipped up and it's not tipped back. And so this is where you can use sometimes, this is a dressage saddle, but it doesn't need to be. You can use your billets and you can use the straps to try and help level that seat, but only if the saddle fits the horse. So this is a fine tuning rather than a fix. The reason that the level seat is really important is because that's where we're going to sit and where our weight is going to go. So we want to make sure that we have that level seat so that weight is evenly distributed over the back and over the shoulders and over the tree of the saddle. The next thing that we need to address so that we all kind of are talking about the same thing is the pommel to cantle relationship. So as eventers, we're pretty familiar with a fairly forward cut saddle and a fairly low pommel and a fairly low cantle so that we can get up and get into our galloping position and get into our knee rolls versus the dressage with a much deeper seat. Now, all of these have a purpose. The general purpose is the same. The jumping saddle is a little bit different. The reason that we need to talk about this is because, yes, there are different purposes for all of these saddles, but the principle remains the same, and that seat should remain level. So it's quite common to see, especially in jumping and in eventing saddles, that the pommel is quite high and the back is very low. And people think that that's, the cantle is low at the back so I can get into my jumping position. That's fine if the seat is level. If the seat is tipped back, it's going to be really difficult for you as a rider to maintain your balance and correctly distribute your weight. So I want to take you kind of back to that visual of the level seat and it being halfway between, and that lowest point is halfway between, because otherwise it's not just the cantle. You really need to assess the seat and the frame. Otherwise, it's going to distribute your weight, and the stirrup bars are going to distribute your weight incorrectly through the tree. This is a really great visual. So again, I think inherently we all know clearance under the pommel, and most people are familiar with the kind of 4 fingers across the withers. So right here, this gap here. I assume everybody can see my mouse. Sorry, I should have asked that. Can everyone see my mouse when I'm waving it around?
Yes, we can.
Okay, super.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have checked that. So I think we're pretty familiar as riders, you know, looking to make sure that there's plenty of clearance between the wither and the pommel here. The one that doesn't get talked about is this one right here, this clearance between the withers and the point sideways. So when we talk about clearance under the pommel, this is a really important aspect of the clearance that I think honestly is quite overlooked for people. And so we want to make sure that we've got the height clearance, but also the width clearance, because remember when our horses are, you know, doing their 20-meter circle in dressage or turning to a combination, there's also that lateral movement. And I think that one tends to be overlooked and forgotten. And then the other point to make here is sometimes if a saddle is too low, if the tree and the point fits, sometimes we can get clearance with either having a saddle reflocked or some other way. But the tree has to fit the horse first. We can't ever make an ill-fitting tree, you know, give us more clearance, but sometimes we can use flocking to help with that. And this is the other biggie, the point angle. And it took me a long time to find an image to accurately explain this. So this is the scapular angle of the horse. We're looking in at the front of the saddle. And this is the tree angle. So the point of the tree is coming down here, and the point of the tree, the angle doesn't change. It doesn't matter if we put padding underneath, if we put, you know, a sheepskin underneath, if we put a half pad, if we put an ogilvy, it doesn't matter. The angle of that tree isn't changing. And the angle of the horse's shoulder isn't changing. These have to match. Otherwise, the saddle doesn't fit. There is some leeway. And sorry, I'll just flip my notes here because I had it written down. So when we look at the point angle, we want it to be, it really, really, really needs to be within 10 degrees of the angle of the scapula, ideally as close as possible. But you can see if the horse's shoulder angle is here and the tree angle is here, if it's more than a 10-degree difference, it doesn't matter what we do, there is going to be pressure right here where these arrows are on that point of the shoulder and right on the cartilage cap. And so if the angle is too narrow, it's going to pinch. There's just nothing we can do about it. And it'll pinch at the bottom of the points. And if it's too wide, it'll either sit right on top of the withers, and so we won't have that clearance that we talked about, or once loaded, it'll kind of rotate down. So sometimes a saddle that's too wide will look like it fits until we put a rider in it, and then it'll kind of rotate down with the back of the saddle coming up and the front coming down. And that's where we won't get that level seat again because the tree is too wide. But this is really, you know, if you take nothing else away from tonight other than this image, this is such a good image of talking about the tree and how that works. And then the panel pressure. So this is a thermal image of essentially underneath of a saddle and where the panel has been pressured on the horses. And so you can see we've got pretty even pressure across the panels here, and then, you know, the skirt coming down and the girth straps. There's nothing here that's really super kind of earth-shattering, other than we do need to make sure that the pressure is even. So often people, you know, are pretty familiar with riding in a clean white saddle pad. Ride in your new saddle or the saddle you're trying, take off the saddle pad and make sure there's even dirt It's not difficult to do. The dirt should be even. If it's just in the front and just in the back and the whole section of the middle is clean, then we've got bridging. And you can see here, this yellow one, ideally we'd like that pressure to be a little bit more even through the panel, but we don't want bridging. And you can also check for that when you set the saddle on. If you take your hand and just run it under the panel, sometimes there'll be like a hole under the panel of the saddle that you can get it in, and that's bridging. And we don't want that, again, because that causes pressure points. What else did I want to say about that? Oh, yes, if you have bridging as well, you'll often get rocking because there's not stability all the way through, which again creates pressure points and discomfort for the horse, but also challenges for us as riders. The opposite can also happen. Sometimes if the saddle is the wrong shape, the middle will contact and the points in the back of the cantle won't. And that's no good either. You can imagine how unstable that is for the rider and how that creates for the horse. So we really want even panel pressure. Gullet clearance. Again, I think inherently most of us know to look for kind of the daylight through the saddle. And you can see here, this has really nice spine clearance on this saddle. Now, some people would argue that these panels are quite narrow and could create pressure. But the point that we're illustrating here is this nice gullet clearance. Whereas on this saddle here, you can see that there's very, very, very little clearance over the spine. And in fact, this saddle has already twisted. It doesn't fit this horse well at all. But you can also appreciate how narrow this is. So as the horse is going to come around in any of its lateral movements or any of its bending, or even just bending around the inside leg, this is going to put pressure on these spinous processes just because it's so narrow. So that's another important point. This image I really like because I think this is a difficult one for people as well. So you can see here that this saddle, this is the tree of the saddle, and this is the horse's last rib. Okay, so you can feel the horse's last rib and follow it up. It curves up like this. We don't want this tree to be past the last rib. We want the rib cage to be supporting the saddle. But when you look at this image where the tree ends, you can see that, the tree is right here. This is padding, so this is okay. So it's really important that you understand the framework or the skeleton of the saddle and the tree. And you can see that the tree here, the last point is still above the last rib. So the reason that that's important is because the rib cage provides support to the spine. If we have it past that, then we're actually into the unsupported kind of suspension bridge of the lumbar back of the horse. And that's not where we want the horse to be supporting weight. So we want that rib cage to be supporting the full weight of that tree. And so I really like this visual because when you first look at this saddle, you're like, oh, well, it's too long. But actually, it's really important that you think about the inside of the saddle and where the tree or the skeleton of that saddle is. The last thing to remember, and this is probably the most important thing, is the horse's response. So all of the things that we just talked about might look perfect, but the horse might just hate the saddle. And that's a really important thing for us to remember as well. So, and I see that quite a bit in my practice. Oh, the saddle fit has been out, the saddle, it's fine. The saddle fitter says it's fine. If the horse hates the saddle doesn't fit. It's a little bit like, you put several pairs of jeans on, some just feel better, even though they all technically fit you. And so that's just an important thing to remember as well as the horse's response. So, why did we talk about all of these things? Again, my goal is to not turn everybody into saddle fitters, but I want you to have some points of reference that you can discuss with your fitter, or you can at least assess on your own horse to be like, oh gosh, I think I need to get a saddle fitting. Or, gee, my horse's back seems a little sore, but my saddle seems to be fitting okay. Now I need some help. this one, this is rider involvement, the myth of the narrow twist. So, has anybody heard, oh, narrow twist, I have to ride in a narrow twist, or has anybody been told that you should ride in a narrow twist? Turn your microphones on or type in the chat or whatever. I'm always really curious to ask this question.
Yes, lots of people have said that.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is where I have to do my terrible drawing, and I really should actually draw this. 1 second. I'm gonna grab a piece of paper here. So this narrow
Sorry, can you explain what a narrow twist is? Because I'm not an English native speaker.
Yeah, I'm just gonna draw you a demonstration here. I have to
Thank you.
draw it because I need to. I'm not very good at drawing, but bear with me. I'm gonna try and do my best here. Okay. So
I'm glad you touched on this. This is a great thing. Lots of people say, like, they talk about this, but I don't know that they know exactly what they're
talking about,
referring
right?
to
So
in reference to the tree. Yeah.
there's a myth out there that a narrow twist improves rider comfort. Okay. And lots of people say, oh, I want to ride in a narrow twist because they think it improves rider comfort. Okay. So, but what happens is, and again, this is a very terrible drawing, so bear with me. I really should actually draw one on my computer. So if you think about, can everybody, hang on, it's going to blur it. Let me hold it so it's not going to blur it. Miserable thing.
Maybe stop sharing your screen. It's really small.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I'm just going to see if I can do this a better way. So let me explain it first, and then I'll stop sharing my screen and do it that way. But the twist is the narrowest part of the seat that we sit on. Okay. So where the purple arrow is right here, that's what we call the twist of the saddle. And
Okay, I get it.
Common. Yep, it's very common for people to say, oh, I need to ride in a narrow twist. And there's this myth out there that, like, it's better for rider comfort. It's better for, it's better for rider comfort. And lots of people say, oh, especially as ladies, maybe as we're getting older and with sore hips, it's like, oh, I have to have a narrow twist. But what's starting to happen is, in order to get that narrow twist, if you think about the panels coming down, I'll try and draw it with my fingers. The panels come down, but then they get closer. And so what's happening is that nice wide gullet clearance that we were talking about, as we go through, there's a narrowing in the middle right over the horse's spinous processes. So, fair enough, Schließe has sort of tried to walk the middle ground, and this is right off Schließe's website. The twist is narrow for the rider, but they don't narrow the panels. They've basically raised the whole tree, and they're trying to attack it that way. But it's a lot of people that, like, it became very, very trendy to have a narrow twist. And yes, it can help some riders, but you have to also look at what that's doing to the gullet around the horse's saddle. And so if you imagine looking down from the back of the saddle down the gullet of the horse, it comes down like this, and then it comes in and then goes out. And so we've lost all of that nice wide gullet space we had, and it makes it very, very, very difficult for the horses to move laterally. And so sometimes what happens is the riders will sit in a saddle and they love it because it's got the narrow twist there, but it's really not great for the horses. So that's another one to be, just aware of when you're looking at a saddle. And, the saddle reps might be like, oh, you'll love this one, it has a narrow twist. That's fine, but the gullet should never narrow. When you look at the gullet of the saddle, that should carry on. The other minefield, shims and pads. So when we take a look at this particular saddle here, and the half pads are super trendy at the moment. The first thing I'll say is, if the tree doesn't fit the horse, a pad is never going to help. It's never going to make a saddle fit a horse. Now, sometimes if we have a horse that's had an injury or it's coming back from work, we need some of the padding, like in this ProLite here, because we need to be able to shim certain areas. Yes, shims can be useful, but they should never be a final solution. So if we have a young horse, for example, that we know is going to change shape, no problem. We can shim the saddle until, you know, until the horse builds some muscle, but the tree should always fit the horse. Often, if we have an asymmetric horse, for example, a horse that's coming back from an injury and it's got some muscle atrophy on one side, sometimes we need to shim the saddle so that the saddle sits squarely and that horse is going to build muscle. But again, it should never be a permanent solution. When we look at a saddle like this, you know, this big pad here, people want to, it's really counterintuitive. People think that when you put padding in there, that you're creating softness and you're lifting the saddle. What you're actually doing is jamming more stuff in there. It's like if your shoe fits you and you wear one pair of socks, if I then make you put on a thick pair of woolly socks and then your thin socks and then put your shoe on, that shoe is going to be really tight. But the shoe fit you before. But now we've put a big wool sock in it. And so these half pads have become really trendy and there's some good things about them. But if you want to use one, make sure that when you have your saddle fitted, that's taken into consideration, because otherwise you're destroying the fit of your tree. And actually, if you look on this particular saddle, you know, we've got all of this padding up here. There's now no contact at all through the front of this saddle. I mean, it's standing off, you know, probably, if I'm guessing, 1.5 inches, 2 inches at the bottom. And you can see that it's altered the fit of the saddle and now the back is lifting up. And this tends to be a really controversial topic because people love to put half pads under their saddles and they love to shim saddles. And yes, it can be a solution, but at least understand what it does to the fit of your saddle when you use these half pads. The other thing I will say is some of the memory foam ones tend to actually cause some trampolining and bounce in the saddle. And it's not so much a shock absorption, but it actually becomes a little bit of a trampoline and a little bit of a bounce, and it can actually cause the rider some problems as well. So when we think about the anatomy of the horse now, not the anatomy of the saddle, because we've just talked a whole bunch about the saddle and the fit of the saddle. And the next half of the talk is really, why do we care? Why do we care about that? Okay. So we need to look at a few things on this diagram. Okay, so we know where the rider is going to sit. So you can kind of see this is the rib that we were talking about. So we don't want the saddle to come, or the tree of the saddle to come past here, because this is where all of the support is for the rider. And then we need to talk about, you know, how it affects the shoulder and how that all ties into the neck and the back. The other thing that's often neglected is the epidermis, or the skin of the horse. So remember that the skin is our largest organ, okay? For horses, the skin is super, super, super important. And there's special mechanisms with horses wow, talking too much. They've developed specifically for helping efficient force transmission. So horses are prey animals naturally. And so a lot of the skin and the ligaments of the horse are designed for the horse to get away from a predator really quickly. And so horses have a really interesting trait that their skin is very, very adhered to the underlying tissue. So the example that I really like to use is often, you know, people are familiar with the scruff of the neck of a cat or a dog. Like if you're going to give an injection in the scruff of the neck or the scruff of the kitten, or we often will see mother cats carrying kittens by the scruff. Horses don't have scruffs, right? Their skin is really tightly adhered to the muscles underneath, and that's for efficient movement transmission. But when we look at that now, when we're fitting saddles and we're putting a saddle on, we have to think about that. So often we'll see people using the kind of jelly pads or the stick pads, and sometimes that can be helpful, but sometimes it can cause us more problems as well. So this is just another thing to think about when you're fitting saddles, and if you're struggling, sometimes it's those sticky pads and we're sticking that onto the muscle underneath, and sometimes actually a little bit of movement isn't a bad thing. So again, coming back to these muscle layers, when we talk about chains of muscle and why saddle fit is important, there's kind of what we call the ventral chain, which is the underneath of the horse, so the belly chain, and then the dorsal chain, so over the back. And these two things have to work in sync. So if the top stretches, the bottom's going to contract, or if the bottom stretches, the top's going to contract. That's how horses move. Muscles work in kind of what we call antagonistic pairs. And so if we're stopping some of these muscles moving correctly with putting a saddle on, we're going to create problems all around the horse. So it's not just about, you know, the back, it's about the whole horse. And then this is the nuchal ligament. So most people are familiar with the nuchal ligament. That's the big ligament on the top of the neck. And again, that's an evolutionary thing, so that horses, basically it helps them lift up a very, very, very head very quickly. It's very, very heavy. And that ligament is a very efficient way of them lifting an extremely heavy head quickly. But what we need to remember is that that ligament is attached to what we call the supraspinous ligament that runs over every spine, or every dorsal spinous process. So every vertebrae on that spine is tied together with this ligament. So now when you start to add in a saddle that's not fitting correctly and a back that's not moving correctly, now we've got dysfunction coming into the neck as well. So long term, we're affecting the whole movement of the horse, and we're affecting the efficiency of movement and the correct transmission of energy and forces throughout the horse's body. And this is just coming back to the spine again, to look at the spine. I always like to bring this image up because people think that the neck, the vertebrae of the neck comes through here. It doesn't. It's really low. And these spinous processes through the withers are really tall. So when you think back to that ligament that is connecting all of those things, now we've really got, you know, a lot of movement, and you think about how much that fans out with the horse's movement. We really need to be careful affecting that movement negatively. And then this is kind of something that is not thought about very often, but remember, we have all of the internal organs as well behind, you know, they're mostly contained in the abdomen. And if the saddle is too far back, we can absolutely have an impact on the organs of the horse. It's kind of not a super important thing, but something that we can't forget about. Again, if the horse doesn't like the saddle and it's not fitting, then that's important. Here's the hot button topic at the moment, kissing spines. So this is what kissing spines look like. So this is the spinous processes of the vertebrae when they're all interacting and they're all crashing into one another. They're causing bony change. We've got all the hallmarks here. So there's overlap of the space or loss of the space. We've got what we call lysis, so too much gray. And we've got what we call sclerosis, so too much white. So those dorsal spinous processes have been hitting each other and causing pain for that horse. That can happen, not always, but can happen from poorly fitting saddles because we're affecting that dorsal spinous ligament. And so, you know, kissing spines, again, is a really hot button topic at the moment. And the reason I wanted to bring it up tonight is because saddle fit can be a contributing factor. It doesn't have to be the only factor, and it isn't always a cause, but it's worth mentioning that over time, these changes can occur. This is a good one. So we know that cervical neck dysfunction can cause front end lameness. So if you think about a poorly fitting saddle that's now affecting those ligaments and affecting the nuchal ligament and affecting the neck and the cervical joints, Now we know that we've got a cause of front end lameness as well. So saddle fit can absolutely cause neck pain, can cause neck dysfunction, and it can cause front end lameness. Thoracolumbar asymmetry. So this is when we talk about, you know, muscle. If you look at a horse's back, it should be nice and round. If one of the muscles is atrophied, or we've got some asymmetry, or we've got a saddle that's fitting asymmetrically and causing the horse to move that way, this can cause problems and lameness. And Jessica, I can get you all of these journal articles as well if people want to read them afterwards. That's not a problem.
I think that would be amazing to send out with the recording of this. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can do. I have those. Just remind me, I'll email them to you.
You bet. Thank you.
Ill-fitting saddles. Again, this is another article. You know, it's really important to recognize an ill-fitting saddle and the consequences to the horse and the rider. So I think, you know, we're really, really good at saying, you know, oh, you know, all these things happen to the horse, and, you know, bad things happen to the neck if the saddle doesn't fit. But, you know, bad things happen to us as riders too. And we need to remember that. And, you know, if we're hurting and we're not moving well, then we're going to have an effect on our horse as well. Same thing, pressure distribution. So this is what we were talking about. The effects of rider size and saddle fit for horse and rider on forces and pressure distribution. This was a pilot study. This was the big controversial one that came out with kind of the weight guidelines and those types of things. But really what came out of it was, if the pressure is evenly distributed and the saddle fits well, horses are very, very good at carrying weight. And when we think back to, you know, the Knights of the Round Table, think about how much those suits of armors weighed, and the horses had armor on and the people had armor on. And, you know, the saddles weren't super comfortable back then, but boy, did those trees fit those horses, because those people rode for days and hours and days and hours in very, very heavy suits of armor. But they understood how to fit the tree to the horse, and they had very few problems. So this is kind of a fun and interesting read, that basically the outcome of it is, if your saddle fits your horse well, it's not really a big deal. This one is really interesting, and a lot of people are surprised by this one. So saddle slip. So if your saddle is always slipping to one side, usually that is an indication of an undiagnosed hind end lameness. So if you have a horse that you ride and your saddle is always slipping in one direction, that horse really should have a lameness evaluation. There's likely an undiagnosed hind limb lameness. That one always surprises people. And usually somebody will say to me, oh, but it's always done that. And my answer is, okay, then your horse has always had a hind end lameness that's been undiagnosed. And so that's a really important thing to think about if you're riding and you're always getting a saddle slip. And so that's a way that, you know, an ill-fitting saddle can actually be a diagnostic indicator for us that, you know, something is going wrong. And then this one was a really fun study that was done, and I just put this one in for fun. It looked at different saddle pads, you know, be it, you know, memory foam or sheepskin or whatever. Interestingly enough, the only one that actually was found out to be beneficial was reindeer hide and reindeer fur. So if you want an ideal saddle pad, according to this study, it should be reindeer hide. But anyway, that's kind of just a fun one that is always fun, because, you know, there's so many different saddle pads that you can get, and really they're all kind of the same, and some of them absorb and some of them do this and whatever, but really the ultimate message that you need to understand is the tree needs to fit the horse, and we can fiddle with the other things a little bit, but if the tree doesn't fit, we're not really getting anywhere. So usually there's lots of questions, so we'll throw it open for questions.
Hi, can you go over again about fitting the point of the saddle horizontally to the withers? Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, no problem. Let me see if I can go backwards. Oh, I can. Okay. Sometimes it won't let me. So if you look, I don't know if you can see this image super well. Sometimes you have to move like the participant screen. And so if you look here, so we're all pretty familiar with the 4 fingers clearance on the pommel directly above the withers, right? But here is the horizontal clearance. So from the side of the wither to the points of the tree, you should get at least 2 fingers in there as well. So we're all pretty good, like I say, at shoving our hand in the front of the saddle and going, oh yeah, there's tons of clearance, but we tend not to make sure that there's clearance in the side of the wither as well. And sometimes that can be really challenging on the more quarter horse types that tend to have the kind of round, kind of muttony withers, right? On the thoroughbred types, that's a little easier because typically they have higher withers with the spinous processes higher above the cartilage cap. But it's just to make the point that we really need that all around clearance, not just the height clearance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
There's a couple questions in the chat. Christine asks, are there any additional considerations with Western saddles?
For sure. So all of these basic points apply. The big thing with the Western saddles is they tend to have a better pressure distribution because the panels tend to be bigger. But what tends to be the kind of the Achilles heel on the Western saddles is the long skirts that tend to go past that last rib cage and interfere with the hip coming forward. So most of the points that we've chatted about, you know, translate. The big thing with if you're checking a Western saddle as well is the length, but also the length of the skirt. Does that make sense?
And I think it's funny because lots of those Western horses are very small.
They're tiny, and a lot of them, and if you look at them, sometimes the skirt on the back of that saddle, like it will literally be banging on the front of the hip bone.
Yeah.
Like, and so the same rule applies with the tree, but then also the skirts can be quite stiff. So it's not so much that the skirt needs to be snugged up to that rib, but make sure that it's not interfering as the horse is bringing its hind leg forward. But the rest of the points really still apply.
Robin has a question. She says, what do you think of treeless saddles?
So that is very much dependent on the treeless saddle. Some of them, I think, and it also depends on the horse. So some of them, I think, work quite well. Some of them, it depends on how they have decided to make the tree. And so I come back to, again, it sounds ridiculous, but I come back to the, you know, the medieval knights, and they rode on trees, right? And they rode on trees for a reason, to get the person off the horse. My personal feeling on treeless saddles is I think they're great if you're a rider with really great balance and fluid movement. I think if you don't have great balance as a rider, I think often the treeless saddles, it's a little bit like the bareback pads. I think, you know, the horse is going to struggle a little bit because the tree does provide that framework and that security for the rider. And so I think if it works for you and it works for your horse, that's great. But I think for me personally, it's a super individual situation. So I don't like them or dislike them. I think it really depends on the individual horse and the individual rider.
Perfect. Thank you. Kathleen asks, can you speak to the ability or inability of spreading a saddle tree?
So that really depends on the saddle. So some trees are designed to be adjustable. Some trees are not. So it absolutely depends on the individual saddle. You know, we're all kind of familiar with the adjustable trees, you know, where you can take out the headpiece and change it. And there is some ability with those ones, and those are designed to do that. The ones that you kind of press or don't press, it really depends on the material that's made. And so what we're seeing a lot with some of the carbon fiber trees, not all of them, as we learned sadly from the submarine that imploded, carbon fiber is very, very, very good in tensile strength, but it's very, very poor in compression. That's just the nature of carbon fiber. So in the submarine, that was unfortunately why the submarine imploded, because it's really not good in compression, but it's amazing in tension. So for example, in yacht sails, it's an excellent yacht sail material because they're under tension. It's very, very strong in tensile strength. But what we're finding with some of the carbon fiber trees is they're really not adjustable because that carbon fiber does not like to be compressed. Now, again, super dependent on the individual saddle, but the carbon fiber trees are not always the best for being adjustable. So it really depends on the design of the tree and whether it's been designed to be adjusted. But really the kind of, can you compress a tree to get a fit? It really depends on if the saddle was designed that way.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and some saddles are not designed that way.
Right.
For
And
sure.
if you compress those ones, it's not gonna be a good day for anybody.
No, very expensive day.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is Diet Coke, by the way. It's not beer, but I just have it in a beer mug.
We wouldn't judge either way. We're
Fair.
all here just having fun and learning. It's all good. Yeah, if anybody else has any questions or anything, feel free to pop on your video and ask them or write them in the chat.
I just had one more question about assessing for bridging. I find it challenging, especially in Western saddles.
Yeah.
Where it's hard to run your hand underneath, and sometimes, the sweat marks are a little bit like reading tea leaves, I find, to be honest.
For sure.
What is do you have any other approaches to assessing for bridging, especially in Westerns?
Yeah, for sure. So the big thing for me is just the overall, like all of the things that you would try and run your hand, look at all of those things. The big thing for me is if there's bridging, the stability of the saddle. So oftentimes if it's bridging, if you take a hand on, on the horn and on the cantle, if you kind of rock it sideways, it'll twist, because there's just not that full kind of coverage on the panel. And so often you'll do that and you go to move it and you'll just find it'll just twist under your hands. So like kind of left to right on the horse, if that makes sense. And often you'll get that as well. You put a rider on and you'll go to twist your weight. When you get on it, you put your weight in one stirrup or the other, or just move your weight. You'll feel the saddle twist because there's not that full contact all the way through. So it can be a little tougher on the Western saddles for sure, especially like you say, trying to get your hand underneath the panel. The other thing is sometimes with the Western saddles, you'll actually see it if you look down the gullet, because you might not be able to get your hand kind of under the skirt, but if you look down the gullet, you'll actually see where it's not contacting.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I hope, like I say, my goal is not to turn everybody into saddle fitters, but I hope it at least gives people kind of a starting point to at least discuss all of this with their saddle fitters, right? And just think about, how the horse moves and why it's important.
Awesome. Sandra asks, the clearance for the withers, how about this with the rider on and with the saddle pad added? How much space would you recommend?
So ideally, with the rider on, that shouldn't change. because in theory, the tree should, you know, sit, I mean, it's going to compress a little bit, but typically you want 4 fingers as it's sitting. If you've got your pad on, probably like 3 is the minimum, because it really shouldn't change that much. If all of a sudden you're going from like 4 fingers to 1.5, likely that's too wide, and we've had that rotation happen. So likely those points are actually too wide, and then when you put weight on, you get that rotation. So it really shouldn't change a great deal with a rider on it, if the tree is fitting correctly.
She said, thank you, that makes sense.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one more question? Sorry, I promise
Of
I'll be
course.
the last one.
No,
I just
you're
wanted to hear your opinion. Like, I know there's a couple of brands that offer different technologies. Like, I know like Hidalgo has like a leather tree that's supposed to flex with the horse, and
Right.
DP has a continuously adjustable gullet. Do you
Right.
have any comments, thoughts on the pros and cons of those sorts of systems?
So generally speaking, any kind of new gimmick, and this is kind of just generally speaking, any kind of new gimmick, typically, if there's lots of them out there, it's because one hasn't got the answer. So most of those things, I think, you know, they can all be helpful in certain cases for certain horses, but I don't think there's one kind of shotgun, oh my gosh, this is the next thing in saddles. And like I say, I know I sound like a broken record, but we've been putting trees on horses for many, many, many years. It doesn't mean that we can't improve what we do, and it doesn't mean that there aren't some things that are going to help. But generally speaking, when we have new things like that coming out, we're still, you know, we're trying to reinvent the wheel, right? And so, you know, a leather tree that's going to flex with a horse, yes, I think that could help with certain horses that really have a problem. I have one client horse that, you know, its poor rider unfortunately spent a lot of money on one of the carbon fiber trees, and the horse hates it because it doesn't move. The horse just hates that saddle. And it's super unfortunate. The saddle fits in theory, but the horse just hates the tree. Tree doesn't move. And so for that particular horse, that might be a really great solution. For somebody like myself that's a little bit older and, you know, I'm not quite as flexible as I used to be, that's probably going to be really hard on my horse cross country. My horse probably wants a tree to give me, you know, some clearance from him, because I'm not as flexible as I used to be. So I think all of those things, it ends up being a super individual preference thing for the horse and the rider combination. And it might work brilliantly for one combination, and it might be horrific for another.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Do you have any comments? This is just a question for myself.
Yeah.
On types of trees, like there's synthetic, there's wood, there's like rawhide. Like, do you have any comments on those versus like flexibility or like not so flexible that may impact a horse or rider?
Yeah, so again, there's lots of options out there because there are lots of preferences from a horse and rider combo, right? And so, like I say, some people love that carbon fiber tree. That seems to be like the trendy thing right now. So I keep coming back to it. I'm not attacking carbon fiber trees. If they work for you, that's great. Like I say, I have one horse that it will not tolerate it. And there's a lot of people that don't love the wooden trees now because they feel like they don't move and they're outdated. You know, I think that's a fair point. The rawhide, again, it's a natural product. It is going to break down over time. Wood will break down over time. And I guess I should have touched on broken trees as well. Do check your tree, because a broken tree, whatever it's made of, is terrible. And so really just taking your saddle and resting it on your leg and kind of checking the cantle and just bringing it forward, you'll know if the tree is, most of the time, you'll know if the tree is broken. Obviously, cross country, if we have a rotational fall and the horse has rolled over the saddle, always, always, always get that tree checked, because sometimes there'll be a broken tree that we're not aware of, and that's really a bad thing to have on a horse's back. So again, I don't know that I have preference or thoughts necessarily on one type versus the other, advantages, disadvantages. There's advantages and disadvantages to all of them, but ultimately I think it comes down to what works for the horse rider combination. Mm-hmm. And we're all different, and that's why there's all the choices out there, right?
Definitely, 100%. Perfect, thank you. We have a question. Have you had any success with the Swift saddle, which is out of England? That's not treeless, but the tree moves with the horse's back. Currently, it's only available as an English saddle.
So I haven't had any experience with it personally, but I think we're moving towards, I think a lot of the saddle companies are moving towards a hybrid system, because I think a lot of people want to get away from the rigid tree. And then we kind of went to a lot of these treeless saddles. And I think that actually riders found them really difficult to ride in from that shock absorption point of view. And I think we're going to see over the next 10 years, a lot of people kind of going towards a hybrid kind of flexible tree system, which, you know, it remains to be seen. Like, it may be, you know, the next step forward. But I think the full treeless saddles, I think a lot of riders are having trouble in them, just because we don't get that little bit of clearance and shock absorption. And I think some horses are struggling. So I haven't had personal experience with it, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that type of thing coming forward in the next few years as like a hybrid between kind of, you get the benefits of the tree, but the flexibility of the treeless, if that makes sense.
Perfect. He said thank you in the chat. Wonderful. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's, and it's like anything, you know, like I say, you have to, obviously we all have to use our judgment. Check your stirrup bars. Just, it's good practice. Check your stirrup bars. Those will fracture and fatigue over time. And check, you know, check your billets, all of those things. I think generally speaking, I think as eventers, we tend to check them because it's kind of, oh, it's a big deal, we're going cross country. And I think we tend to check them, but they should be checked. I had a client recently that the horse had a sore back, and, you know, I'll often say, you know, I'm not a saddle fitter, but hey, can I see your saddle? And she said, yeah, no problem. We put the saddle on, the fit looked okay. And I flipped it up and the stirrup bar was completely fractured and sheared off.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and then of course, poor lady was horribly embarrassed. She's like, oh, I should have checked that. And it's like, well, it's okay. You know, it's just something to remember. So, you know, obviously it is equipment and it should be inspected and maintained for, you know, your safety and the horse's comfort, right?
Yeah, and something as simple as that, like if you were walking through a doorway and your stirrup got caught on something,
yeah,
like just simple things like that could definitely bend something or throw something off. So yeah, that's definitely a good thing to keep in mind, just to just double check. If something looks off, it probably is.
Yeah.
100%.
But hopefully people learned or thought about a few different aspects of saddle fit.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, if anybody's in any other questions, we'll just give you a minute if you want to type them or pop on and ask. Otherwise, I think we're...
The other one that usually comes up, if something else pops up, that's fine. The other thing I usually get asked is the shoulder clearance or the sternum clearance girths that are coming out now. Mm-hmm. And so I think, you know, again, it's like anything, but kind of generally speaking, there's some good ones, there's some not so good ones, and it super depends on what works for your horse. But I do think, you know, we're trying, right? I have one horse that just loves that sternum relief girth that has the no pressure on the sternum. And, you know, we were having trouble with that horse, and we've put that on him to try, because I was adjusting his sternum quite a lot. And I think maybe he had an accident when he was younger. I don't know. But he has that sternum relief girth now, and we got it to try, and it's been life-changing for that horse. So again, I think in certain instances, those can be really great too.
Yeah, that's a great point, because everything all works together for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Or else I think we're probably getting close to wrapping up if nobody else has any other questions or anything.
Sure.
Sandra says, thank you very much. Really enjoyed your talk and your kind ways of addressing possible problems in saddle fitting. Thank you for coming, Sandra, and everybody else. Yeah, we're here to learn and educate, and we are very thankful for everybody that joins us, and in that also everybody who watches on YouTube afterwards, because this will also be uploaded to YouTube. So if you have friends or anybody who weren't able to make it tonight, let them know, and we will definitely, this will be up for watching afterwards.
Super.
Okay.
I really appreciate everybody spending a little bit of time. And like I say, my goal is not to make everybody into saddle fitters, but at least hopefully you can leave and at least feel like you can assess if you're in the ballpark or not with your horse and your saddle.
Yeah, definitely. And Sarah will email me those studies and we'll send them out with the recording of this. Julie asked, where can we find it recorded? Missed it as I thought it was BC time. The Alberta Horse Trials YouTube. No, it's all good. The Alberta Horse Trials YouTube channel. If you don't follow our Facebook, it'll be up on there. And if you've registered for this, we're going to email it to you as well. But all of our webinars the past few years, and we've done several for the past 3 or 4, are all up on our YouTube for rewatch. And there's been some really amazing ones. And we're super thankful for all of our speakers, including Sarah. I think this is the 4th time you've talked for us.
I know. I said you guys aren't bored of me yet.
No, and we're super, super thankful for everybody who joins us and everybody who talks. To the AHTA for sponsoring this, Kathleen for organizing. And yeah, I think we are good to end it here. We hope everybody has a great rest of your night and a great eventing season coming up, or the rest of whatever equestrian season you're participating in. And we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks everybody. All right. Bye-bye.